Our opening track may well have tipped you off as to who's joining us this evening. Call Me got to number 12 in 1985 for Go West. And from that band, we welcome frontman and vocalist Peter Cox, who, together with musical partner Richard Drummie, has performed as Go West at all three Rewind festivals this summer. And I hear that in addition to a few more UK dates this year, you're going out on tour with Wet, Wet, Wet early next year before heading over to New Zealand to tour there.
Which is going to be exciting. So it's already shaping up to be a busy year.
Right, well, as we are wont to do on our great conversation, Peter, let's step back through the mists of time to find out what your earliest musical influences have been. Let's start off by asking, what kind of stuff were you absorbing from your parents' musical choices?
Perhaps predictably, being of an age, they were into the Rat Pack singers, Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. To my untrained, naive ears, all of that sounded very much the same to me. Kind of comical that my first passion musically was for the reggae that was coming out of Jamaica at the end of the 60s and the early 70s. And of course, my dad was bound to say, well, that all sounds the same to me. And I guess there's a certain... I got some sympathy with that point of view. I could see why he would say that about that reggae. Whereas now, of course, as a singer of long experience, you know, when I see a film, for example, of Sinatra singing live, as you had to in those days, from start to finish, a full performance with an orchestra, when you see that him doing that thing, you realise what a peerless vocalist he was.
Come fly with me.
So how about then when you did become aware of music and your peers, your schoolmates were talking about music? Do you remember the first record you ever bought or the first song you ever heard that really blew your mind and just, flipped that switch into having a lifelong passion for music?
The first genre that I became really passionate about, largely connected with the fashion that I was, you had cliques of people who dressed a certain way, and that particular crowd that I was knocking about with were into, as I said, the reggae coming out of Jamaica. This would be before the British version, the British ska invasion, whatever, before that. So really early days of Bob Marley, for example, I was really passionate about before they became internationally successful.
I shot the sheriff, but I did not shoot, but I did shoot the deputy.
1973, I Shot the Sheriff from Bob Marley and the Wailers, an early influence on tonight's special guest, Peter Cox of Go West, and we will continue our great conversation next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles, where we're joined by our special guest, Peter Cox, for our great conversation. He has a new solo album out called Sea Glass. You can see him in action as part of Go West in November and December when they have some UK dates. Back, though, to meandering through your own musical memories then, Peter. Before the break, we were talking about how you were seriously into reggae as a youngster. So as you began to realise that you could sing and you were identifying as a vocalist, Peter, did your musical tastes evolve? And what were favourite songs from back then?
A fairly natural progression from reggae was into Motown and Just My Imagination, The Temptations, or maybe Have You Seen Her, The Shy Lights, because, of course, Motown was largely the soundtrack of my later teen years.
Of course.
And, of course, again, reiterating from a singer's point of view, remembering very well that the vocal performances on those records, which are awesome and still hugely stand the test of time, that all had to be live.
The Shy Lights, Have You Seen Her, from 1972. So they were a favourite, Peter, and so was Motown, generally.
I had the good fortune of visiting Hitsville in Detroit as a part of a TV show that I was involved in called Reborn in the USA, and we got to visit Hitsville, and I stood there in the room, and there's a huge mural on the wall, or there was then, of Stevie Wonder recording, and every other instrument on that record is in the room.
Oh.
The horns, the backing vocals, the drums, everyone's crammed into this, what is quite a modest and small studio there. So yes, knowing that these amazing vocal performances were undoctored, which very few people are doing these days, because of course technology has moved on so much.
And you were talking about the Hitsville with the Stevie Wonder. What track was that, or what album was that?
I'm not sure what they were recording then,
right.
But as I say, it's a very powerful image when you're standing and you're looking at that, and you're in the room where that photograph was taken. And again, as I say, it underlines the fact that in those days, literally everything was live right there. It just all happened. So the performances you hear certainly on those earlier records was a band playing in a room with a singer singing live with the band. And that happens less and less these days, I think.
Pick a favourite Stevie track then from sort of around then.
Oh, I'm thinking of those early recordings now. Uptight out of sight.
Oh, brilliant stuff. So when did you first realise that you had a set of pipes on you? When did you first know that you could really sing, Peter?
Well, I was in the choir at school, and my school, Hampton Grammar, had a connection with the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court Palace, and so not by choice, but kind of by default, I was encouraged, let's say, to go over to the chapel and have an audition.
Right.
It was quite a simple audition, and I got into the Chapel Royal Choir at Hampton Court Palace as a soprano, and I sang there for a year or so until my voice broke, and that was fantastic ear training. But again, at that age, certainly speaking for myself, I was much more interested in football, and quite soon after that, girls. So my choral career didn't last very long. But I guess my teachers, my teachers, the choir master at the Chapel Royal, clearly felt that I wasn't holding anybody else back, if you like. And then, as I say, I left the choir and gravitated to football and girls quite quickly. But, as we've already discussed, I was a music fan. I still am a music fan. So I had those passions going on in the background. And pretty soon I found myself in a little blues rock band. I'd have been 17, 18. We primarily rehearsed. We didn't really do many gigs.
Right.
I think we rehearsed in a tiny soundproofed room at the back of a shop in Putney in London. With 200-watt amps and 4x12 cabs and a drum kit and me in this tiny room. One benefit of that setup was, of course, I could shout to the top of my lungs for 3 hours until I lost my voice and no one could hear anything I was doing. So it got me over any kind of, some of the self-consciousness that I might have had at that point as a singer, because nobody could hear anything I was doing. Yeah.
What would be a cover song that you remember doing in that band?
Well, we were fans of the band Free. Paul Rogers was the singer in Free,
right.
And this is the common ground that I had with Richard, my partner in Go West, because he was also a fan of that band, and our two separate bands were playing very much that kind of music. In fact, my own band was named after a Free song, Bodie, and we didn't really have any original material at the start. So while I'm not sure that the concept of a tribute band existed in those days, but and as I say, we played almost no shows, but at the same time, all we did was play their songs. So I guess, it would be, we just did the best version of them that we could, really.
For Free in 1970, and a favourite cover version for fledgling musician Peter Cox of Go West, our special guest for our great conversation, which continues next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles. Tonight, our special guest for the great conversation is Peter Cox of Go West. And Peter, I always love to hear the story of that particular moment when you first realised as a young band who were desperately trying to make it that you were actually breaking through? It was happening, and life, as you knew it, was about to change. Is that a clear memory for you?
Yeah, as you say, when the first time we heard We Close Our Eyes on the radio, we were in the Go Westmobile, which was Richard's knackered old custard yellow Fiat, so old and decrepit that the driver's door was tied on through the roof rack with a piece of rope. We were riding along in that, and We Close Our Eyes came on the radio, and exactly as you say, we couldn't really we could barely believe it. And I remember that we were on Putney Bridge. That might be an exaggeration. I might have made that up in my mind, but what I do remember is when the song was playing on the radio, it was such a moment that Richard pulled over and we both got out of the car and just kind of looked around to take in, what was that moment when you first hear yourself on the radio. Yeah.
We Close Our Eyes, the debut hit single from Go West, which got to number 5 in 1985. You painted a beautiful picture, Peter, of the first time you chaps heard your song on the radio. And what about the first time you found yourself? I mean, the first time you heard it on the radio, amazing, but it's still the two of you, as you said, in the Go Westmobile, going, oh my God, that's us. What about the first time you found yourself amongst peers that you had previously, been influenced by or looked up to, that you couldn't quite take in, that you were now standing next to them or on the same show as them or on the same stage as them?
Yeah, well, in my naive imagination, before We Close Our Eyes came out, we were making an album, which was Living the Dream. That was what we'd always wanted to do. We had a very limited ambition, very limited foresight of what the next step would be. And I kind of imagined that we'd have a single come out and it would sort of get in the low 80s, 90s, and we'd play some shows and build up a following. And We Close Our Eyes was immediately successful, I suppose partly because the company spent so much money on the video for that song. So,
they did back then.
Yeah, that's right. It was the 80s. And so we found ourselves quite quickly, much more quickly than I'd ever expected, on top of the pops. Now, Richard has told a similar story more recently, and he remembers all the other artists that were on. Well, I mean, we were on top of the pops several times in 1985, so I can't specifically remember which artist was on when, but Boys to Men were there. Gary Barlow came into our dressing room wanting to have a picture, and so on and so on. So it was a great experience, but without wanting to make this a difficult conversation, Richard's always been much more accepting and confident about his success. I always found that much more challenging. So there was a degree of deer in the headlights going on in my case, which I think is partly why I remember less detail of that first year when everything was just flying by and we were traveling all over the world, and all of that, of course, was really exciting. But I remember my manager saying to me, "But are you enjoying it, Pete?" And it was. I was a lot of the time. I think, frankly, I was absolutely terrified. When the time grew near for me to show.
Let's finish then with, again, this is quite a tough one to ask, a song for you that resonates as a life lesson or a life philosophy, one that unfailingly uplifts or inspires you.
There's a song that comes on that is an instant mood improver. I'm going to go with I'll Take You There by the Staples Singers.
Oh, nice. And that's always been a favourite.
Yeah, and what is such an awesome groove when there are so few instruments playing. That record's got, it's got some real muscle, and it's by today's standards, it's quite underproduced. Obviously, a fantastic vocal performance, but it's the rhythm section that sounds great on that record. Anyway, it's a top vibe.
From 1972, I'll Take You There by the Staple Singers. A cracking final track tonight as chosen by our special guest Peter Cox of Go West. Fabulous.